Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm speaking with Dr. Mitch Greene. Mitch, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Thrilled to be here.
Well, I'm excited to be talking to you today about your book, Courage Over Confidence. We're going to be unpacking your new book. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Sure. Well, have a PhD in clinical psychology. That's really where I got my career started, was as a day-to-day clinician working with kids and families. I was a fellow in family therapy after my PhD, so I really was living a life as a workaday clinician, but always with the back of my mind an interest in sports, an interest in sports psychology. And after about 10 years of doing that typical day to day clinical work, I decided to jump into the wild world of sports at a time when my partnership in my practice that I owned with a psychiatrist had kind of needed to change direction. And I used that as an opportunity to sort of take a look at what I was doing and think, do I want to change a direction? And I'll just add that my wife at the time thought, why would you want to change direction? You're busy. You've got, your phone is ringing off the hook. What's the problem? But I had a calling, like I had a passion. There was more that I wanted to do. And in particular, I think when I think about the sports getting into the sports world, I really wanted to get those people in the office that might not otherwise come talk to someone because they would be embarrassed. They'd think only people with psychological problems talk to people like you, Mitch Greene. And I wanted to create an environment where they would think, okay, this guy gets it. He gets sports. He's cool. He gets how to help me. And so that's been now the past 20 years or so has been me doing that in a private practice in the suburbs of Philly.
Why the calling to sport? Did you play and compete in sport? Were you just a big sports fan? What was the genesis of that calling?
Yeah, I was always a sports fan, but I was always somebody who loved to play and compete. And even at my ripe old age, now I'm still involved in endurance racing and marathon running. And I did, Ironman triathlon and was,
Wow.
an athlete in high school and through college. But I think the calling was more, hit me really in graduate school when, and I do mention this in the book, when a professional baseball player for the New York Yankees named Chuck Knobloch um, no longer could throw the ball from second to first base without throwing it over the first baseman's head or in the dirt. And even though I was going to graduate school in Philadelphia, I was still following the New York sports scene, which is where I'm from, New York.
Okay.
And I um, was mesmerized. It was really hit me. Although there've been other players, that one really hit me. That how could somebody so good could stink so badly? And I began talking to my professors about it. I began trying to research things about the yips and about mental blocks, and kind of learned about some of the other athletes in the professional world that have gone through similar blocks. And that never really went away, even though I was practicing clinical psychology when I got out of grad school. I was always keeping my one eye on what was going on in the sports psych world, and then the time felt right for me to take the leap.
You're an endurance sport performer. How's the psychology of your endurance sport?
Oh, I love that's probably what I love about the endurance sport game more than anything else. I
Is it a strength of yours, do you think?
I absolutely think it's a strength of mine.
Okay.
Not that don't have not that I haven't had to learn along the way. My very first triathlon, I don't want to sound, I want to make sure I stay humble here because I am, because the very first triathlon I did, I didn't finish it.
Right.
And I didn't finish it not because I wasn't in shape to finish it. I wasn't finishing it because I got way too mind chattery in my head. And when the current and the waves were sort of, I felt like too much for me.
Mm.
And it was a terrible but great moment for me because I couldn't believe I couldn't figure it out, but it drove me to even dig further into the mental game and help other people who were struggling similarly. So I'd like to say it went from, maybe a weaker part of my game to one of the best parts of it.
Do you think, as a practicing sports psychologist, those experiences, those personal experiences, help inform your practice, help you empathize with the person in front of you?
I think absolutely 100%. When somebody says they're so in their head that they fear that they won't survive it, or they don't know how they could show their face back at work if it doesn't play out the way everybody thinks it's supposed to play out, I think that's a huge asset. I think actually the other asset, which is something I don't talk about in the book, that has made me um, really connect with my clients and them feel it is my own daughter, who was a college athlete. One of my daughters really had terrible bouts of mind chatter, and in my effort to help her, and in my but I was just dad with her, but in my efforts to get her help, and in watching her go through the roller coaster of her running and racing career, when I have athletes talk about it with me, I know because my own daughter would talk about it with me at home, or I'd watch it firsthand in a race, and I think that comes through when I talk to the clients. I'm not just like pretending I get it. Like I'm like so there with them, and when, as you know, as a clinician, when you could say it to them, sometimes almost before they say it to you, when you could say something like, "Oh," and I wouldn't be surprised if you also said, "What about what will my coach think, or what if I never reach my potential, or what if that injury flares up again?" And you could kind of start quoting them before they even have to say it. That's when you really know that they get that you get it. And I think some of those experiences, personal and familial, have been a huge asset for me. Yes.
You've used the term a few times already, mind chatter, and that mind chatter lies at the heart of your book, Courage Over Confidence. I'm keen to get onto that, but I do want to ask a couple of questions before that. We've had a few clinical psychologists or people with clinical psychology backgrounds on the Sports Psych show before, but I'm keen to get your experience and viewpoint on the changing landscape over the last 20 years around the interest in and openness around mental health in sport. How that seems to have broadened, opened up, deepened. There's a lot more conversation in this area. What's been your experience, and what are your thoughts on the opening up and the broadening of conversation around mental health in sports?
Well, you're right. It has been a remarkable change at every level of sport. When the professionals and Olympians started talking about their own mind chatter, if you will, or more serious psychological difficulties that they have struggled with, um, I think that really changed the landscape for all those athletes kind of beneath them, if you will, at lower levels of sport, and help normalize a conversation or bring it into the consciousness, um, where more even athletes I have are just talking about working, let's say with me, just for example, or whoever they're working with, amongst each other, and kind of more openly saying, "Oh yeah, I had to go talk with Mitch the other day because I was freaking out about my game, or freaking out about my relationship, and I never thought I'd be ready for the game." And it has been it has been an asset for me as a clinician, because when I'm talking to somebody who feels like they're the only one, which is often the case, or they feel like they are a coward or a wimp for having so much negative chatter going through their minds. I could point to some of these examples of people who have felt like frauds out there. I had a chance to be at the 2016 Rio Olympics, doing some work there. I got to see athletes, throwing up and all kinds of things happening, where they were panicking, and really reinforced this idea that everybody struggles at some level with some of this stuff, some more than others, of course. Um, and here in the States, as you know, the NCAA hasn't fully required yet these college programs to have people like myself on board, but many do, and many are
Hmm.
doing that. And I wouldn't be surprised here in the States if at the high school level that becomes more than just a an add-on where they just have somebody come and give a talk where they'll have a strength and conditioning coach, which they already have, an athletic trainer, which they already have, and a sports psychologist sort of on staff. And I think that's all for the better. So those people who need help even earlier on in their sporty career can get it, hopefully, and learn the tools that they need to learn to feel more like themselves again.
So, in summary, your experience, there's been a normalization that's taken place,
Uh huh.
and athletes are willing to express vulnerability even publicly, even amongst themselves.
And voluntarily, it's not as if they're forced to.
Yeah,
They are volunteering this sort of. Yes, that's been radical.
interesting, interesting. Your book, Courage Over Confidence, excited to dive into this. Tell us a little bit about the history of this book. When did the idea of writing a book emerge, and tell me about the process of starting this?
Oh, sure. The book idea has been around for probably close to 10 years,
Hmm.
and it had started and stopped several times. But it was the pandemic that made me double down on the commitment
Okay.
that I to really it was that was one of the quote unquote silver linings that came out of the pandemic for me was I kind of had no more excuses, and I tapped into the right kind of support and help because I knew I needed support and help to get this thing done. And the genesis, so that was kind of the timing of it, but the genesis was all these years of having clients come into my office, and maybe I will just briefly mention mind chatter in a conversation in the first session. And before I know it, they're coming back for their second session telling me about their mind chatter, where I think, wow, we didn't even really start talking about it, but that term stuck with them. It made sense to them. It provided relief to them that I kind of got it. And mind chatter, for those listening, is that I define it as the conversation we're having with ourselves that's full of doubt, second guessing, and negative thinking. And that's my term for negative self talk, or so everyone has maybe their own way of talking about it, but this really worked for me, and I found that it really hit home for these athletes. It just stuck with them. They would use the terminology, and uh, so that plus some of the results I was seeing with the approach that I was taking, um, and I knew I wanted to try to reach a wider audience than just those in my particular area. And so the book, eventually, I'm so proud that the book uh, came out. I'm still basking in it because I know what it was like this time last year. You would have found me just sort of sitting at home, at a desk trying to crank it out. So it feels good to still, see the fruits of the labor. So and I'm excited just to be talking to you about it. It feels great.
Well, fantastic. And mind chatter lies at the heart of this book, as you said there. And thank you for defining it. And as you said, as consultants, we tend to use different terms, don't we? I
Yeah,
mean, as I was listening to you there, I was thinking of the term I use, ant automatic negative
yeah,
thoughts, which you will have
yeah,
heard a
sure.
lot about as well. And I always think that whether it's mind chatter or ants or any other term somebody uses, it instantly, when you put a term on the table, you're creating that framework, aren't you? You're creating that mental framework. Just by putting a
Yeah.
term on the table, you're actually starting to help somebody organize their inner world.
I certainly am, and I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. And I know you can relate to this, Dan. I also get them to stop, to sort of realize that it's not them, so to speak.
Interesting.
That's up to trouble here. They're the ones who signed up for the event. They're the ones who've been training their butts off. They're the ones who are in the gym. They're the ones who are setting goals. And I kind of set it up so that it's sort of like me and them against their chatter. and their chatter has a wholly different agenda than they do. That's the voices, I've sort of said that is thinking already about what could go wrong, might go wrong, could go wrong, what people might think, who will be disappointed, and what it all might mean, and who will judge me for it. Um, so there's the term itself, and then there's the value of it being sort of outside of oneself, so to speak, that I think gives us a chance to sort of look at it from a distance. And people have never considered it, often have never considered it or looked at it that way. They thought it was them. There was something wrong with them. They're coming to me looking for a diagnosis for a major psychological problem, and I'm saying that's not what's happening. It's just your chatter goes on duty the second the second you get on the bus to the event, um, and we need to now kind of unpack that, and there's a lot of value in that.
Well, it's interesting. We're going to, I'm sure, strongly agree for the next 40 minutes or so, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about, some of the messages I try to put out there in my own consultancy practice. How, well, I always say to clients, thoughts happen to you, emotions happen to you, feelings happen to you.
That's right.
They're not your fault. You experience them rather than do them. That feels very aligned with your message there. And I know in chapter one, which is entitled Mind Chatter in Youth and Professional Sports, I think very much in this chapter it feels like you're sort of speaking to the notion that this emerges in youth sport, and people experience this in professional sports. It's across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I wanted the book to appeal not just to one group of athletes, not just the kids, not just the parents, not just the pros or the high performers. I wanted to be clear that this was a universal phenomenon. And of course, I did get asked by some book people and agents if I wanted to write the book just not about sports per se, but just write about mind chatter in life. And I said, of course, that's appropriate, but that's not what I want to do, at least not right now. And so, yeah, I wanted to bring out the universality of it. I did write in part in the book how I feel like more than ever that the context in which kids are playing sports is ripe for chatter, because every as you we you know youth sports is such big business. It's billions of dollars worth of money. There's more competition than ever before. There's less free play. Um, and kids feel sometimes like if they don't have a sport or their sport by the time they're 8 or 9, they and their parents may start to panic, thinking, all right, maybe I have to give up soccer and turn to softball because soccer doesn't look like, I'm going to be a sort of a star in it. And so it starts very young. The parents get indoctrinated into this sort of mentality. And now I have a family full of chattery people who when things go well, it's great, but when the competition gets a little bit tougher, when Joey or Jamie starts to face when everybody gets really good, they don't have the tools to manage it. And um, but then I do have professionals and Olympians who are coming to my office as well, who also have their own version of the same problem. But in that case, it's, will my sponsors stick by me? What if I don't longer? Who am I if I were to retire? Who am I without my sport anymore? People know me, my reputation, and my whole identity is as a star athlete, and then they go into an event full of chatter and need also some strategies to disentangle themselves from their chatter.
Yeah, this socio-cultural landscape of sport, whether it's participative sport, youth sport, or whether it's serious adult elite sport, the socio-cultural pressures placed on participants at all ages and all levels tend to broaden and deepen that mind chatter. It's quite a complex. That complication in our world creates the complex experiences that we have internally.
Yeah, and I would add, you know, I don't know how you feel over there, but here, at least for in my world here in America, what's going on in our political landscape. is so ripe for chatter as well. There's so much uncertainty. There's obviously this is big stakes we're talking about, whether you know or whatever your political persuasion, it's going to be big stakes for you because there are things that you really care about. And I watch my kids who are now in their early 20s, um, chattery about things that when I was growing up, I never would have paid so much attention to. Now every day you're hearing something coming on in the news and you're thinking, oh my God, like is the world coming to an end, or is our political system completely falling apart? And so it's the socio-cultural landscape, not just in the youth in the sport world, but it does make me worried about us as as humans and as people, that there's so much to worry about, right? And there's so much information coming in. It feels like people like you and I and all our fellow colleagues, there's just a more and more of a need for people like us to hopefully help people. If we could do it ourselves and take care of ourselves, then hopefully we could help other people manage all the uncertainty.
Well, we're not at a too dissimilar age, I'm sure. And growing up, we would have to read a newspaper or turn on the TV and watch the news to actually access the news. Whereas these
Right.
days, to speak to your point, I think people are bombarded by social media, and so again, we broaden and deepen our mind chatter. And in chapter two, however, it feels like you break a Western world rule here by saying, hang on a minute. Positive thinking actually is not the greatest combatant of our mind chatter to, as I would say, squash the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. Chapter two, why positive thinking doesn't work. Come on, Mitch, tell us. Surely you're wrong there. Positive thinking has to work, doesn't it?
Well, if it worked, anybody who tried to stick with a diet would stick with their diet, or tried to think positively to lose weight or stop smoking. It would just be a matter of,
Yeah.
if we could just control our thoughts, then and think positively, good things will happen. I think that came out of a movement in like the 70s with the positive thinking movement, where um, the idea was Stephen Covey and others, where if you could just think more positive thoughts, good results will come. That your attitude will determine your altitude. And I think the caveat is, I'm not against positivity. Just like later in the book, it's not as if I'm against people feeling confident. But the question for any practitioner like myself and you is, well, what if you're not feeling positive and you're not feeling confident? People come and talk to me, probably like you, after they've already tried the positive thinking approach. They've already tried to tell themselves that they can kick butt today, that they're an animal, they're a beast, they've got this, this is them, they're ready to go. But when that doesn't work, try to convince yourself that you're feeling great when you're really feeling nervous and worried, actually can make you feel worse, not better. Um, because it's inauthentic. It doesn't really, for about 5 seconds, you might think you've got it. And then 5 seconds later, you're feeling like right back to the way you felt beforehand. And so what I preach and teach is that it's not about necessarily being more positive. It's about learning to manage those doubts. And so I want people to feel like they don't need to be more of something they're not. It is very much an acceptance based approach. I want them to, I want us to kind of work on an agenda that they haven't really been taught before. And I really try to get them to say, no one's taught you how to do this before, but I want you to understand why you're having those doubts, how to better manage them, quiet them. Um, and if we can do that, then you'll be able to focus better on that next game. Then hopefully some good things will happen from it. And then hopefully that will lead to some positivity and some confidence. But I think they're trying to do it in a different way, and that way tends to not work.
Just speaking, it makes me, from my own work, I know that negative emotion can fuel action.
Yeah.
I know that critical thinking can drive ideas. And also, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on this. 20 years working with athletes as you have done, I do find today's athletes quite demanding in terms of solutions, and certainly not cynical, but certainly skeptical about anybody turning up being too unidimensional about things. Well, you just got to think
Yeah.
positively. Athletes these days don't. This generation, I don't think, accept that kind of simple
Yeah.
answer.
Well, I certainly believe that because of what I do for a living, just like you do. I mean, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I see on social media is a lot of pop, I call it sort of pop psychology, you know,
Yes.
like, get after it and you got this. And again, I think there's a place for it. I don't want to suggest that I won't go into a workout and say to myself, come on, Mitch, you got this. Let's go And again, if it feels like it fits with where I am at that moment, then it might give me a little bit of an extra push. But we're talking about if those situations, right, aren't working. Um, what I have found in my work, and that's really why I'm writing the book, is people find this approach unique, refreshing, um, at removing self blame. Um, I want them to not feel like they're a coward or a wimp for having their chatter. And some people are built that way. Some of the people I talk to are quite chattery outside of sport. They worry about their friendships more. They realize more than they should. They worry about their relationships more than they should. And I want them to know the big message here is that you could have chatter and be world class. It's not one or the other. It's not mutually exclusive. That if I can help you learn how to manage it, you could still play at that high level like many others do, but no one's yet taught you how to do that, and that's where I come in.
Well, I mean, speaking to your first point, I don't think either of us would start recommending that sporting environments should be dripping with negativity, would we? But
No,
that's absolutely not what we're saying. But there's a nuance and complexity to human functioning, and to speak to some of what you've said there, or to ask a question around this, I think part of the misunderstanding of positive thinking out there, and maybe these come wrapped in social media memes, simple social media memes, is this notion of control. And I hear a lot, oh, well, you can control your thoughts. Well,
yeah,
it's easy to
yeah,
control your
yeah,
attitude. And it's like, well, you know what? Maybe there is a choice there, but it's often a difficult choice. And so
yeah,
I think this is a neat segue to ask you to unpack this a little bit more, because chapter 3 and 4 and 5, you really start to dive into the fundamentals of mind chatter and planning for chatter's arrival. Can you, because I think you are somebody who in this book who's getting away
yeah,
from, oh, well, you can just control this, and you
yeah.
obviously you're saying, well, it's not just about positive thinking. So tell me about the nuance and complexity of mind chatter here.
Sure. Well, I certainly want to agree with you, and I make the point in the book that we have less control over our thoughts than we might wish to believe or
Yes.
or think. And to dig in a little deeper, I think what will be helpful is to understand that chatter doesn't just show up randomly. You're taking a stroll with a friend of yours in a beautiful park, likely not going to have too much chatter, not too much doubt or second guessing or negative thinking. You're watching your favorite show on Netflix, or you're at an easy practice on a Tuesday afternoon with your mates, and uh, you generally speaking, there's always exceptions to this, but generally speaking, the mind isn't focused too much on what could go wrong and feeling catastrophic about it. Quite predictably, I want my athletes to understand that it shows up under two conditions: when there's uncertainty and high stakes. And when I work with someone, and I tried to get at this in the book, um, I want them to appreciate that the stakes, they don't always, outside of their awareness, are a lot of the stakes that they're just not, that is driving all their fear. In other words, they might be afraid about losing or not winning, but we go much further in my office, and I think this is part of the power of this approach. When I get them to sort of talk more about what's at stake, we wind up talking a lot about their reputation, their identity, um, who they are without that top five result. Who are they without making the varsity team? Who are they without making the Olympic team? Um, Not meeting expectations, embarrassment, So I explain to them that I understand how this works, that the reason we are your chatter is kind of the chatter button is getting pushed is because your mind is sort of taking you not just to, I wonder what might happen in this next game, but it's already drawing up a series of sort of catastrophic potential endings that include you feeling like, you might not be able to survive this. And I want them to understand that this is how our minds work. I don't want to go on and on here, Dan, so I'll try to be brief, but that how our minds work is that it tries to protect us from terrible outcomes and bad things happening to us. Just like, you know, if I was to go eat a berry in the woods and I didn't know what the berry was, if it was poisonous or not, hopefully I would have a mind that would start getting chattery and saying to me, geez, what if you eat that? What happens if you start to feel sick? You're all by yourself. You're in the middle of the woods. And my mind, thankfully, would start drumming up terrible outcomes to try to protect me from doing something that is potentially dangerous. Out on the sports field, the mind is also now similarly looking to protect you. It's not protecting you from eating a berry, but it's similarly protecting you from the hazards of potential disaster. In this case, more psychological disaster, like anybody who you thought you were might just wind up blowing up in front of your face, and you will be left with nothing. And I want people to appreciate when I talk to them about managing their chatter that there's a them who shows up to the event with particular aspirations and goals and whys, and then there's their chatter who's overprotective, over worried, looking to the future. And once we get good at sort of us understanding that there's two things going on at once, then we could start to begin to plan for how to manage it. So I apologize, just one more thing. So when we show up to an event or a game, I want them to not be caught by surprise. I'm saying to them, of course your mind chatter is going haywire. Of course it's telling you that what if she does better than you do or he does. So, but the more we can expect it, the more we're ready for it, we're the better position we are to manage it. And again, that's in the book, and I kind of go through step by step some strategies to handle the chatter.
What I'm hearing you say there is your ability to change your relationship with chatter starts by potentially expecting that in these moments of uncertainty and high stakes that you're going to experience mind chatter. If we're competing on a Saturday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, actually getting clear in our minds that on Saturday, this is a moment of uncertainty. This is a moment of high stake. This is meaningful to me. This is important to me. And so subsequently, I'm probably going to experience mind chatter here. It feels like the management starts prior to the game by sort of philosophically understanding this is going to be part of my experience.
Yeah, that's the fun for me. And then we could take it one step further and say to the athlete, when do you think it will really, what can we plan for? Some of it you of course can't plan for. Well, they'll say, that first shot on goal that goes sailing over the goal. I know I'm going to be beating myself up, and my mind's going to say, "Up, here we go, another crappy game. Here we go, another game of missed shots and turnovers." And so we can actually anticipate our responses to the chatter, knowing. So instead of the chatter coming in after that missed first shot and going, "Oh my God, here we go again. I can't believe I'm in this headspace again. I knew this was going to happen." All that inefficiency, all that mental drag.
Mm.
I the exciting part of me is I talk to them in this way, like we want to be efficient, we want to be smart and efficient in how we manage this, and all that comes, as you said, before the game starts. We've already anticipated as much as we could in terms of what to expect, when to expect it, and then get into how to manage it, which we could talk about in a little bit.
Well, I'd actually like to talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit. I mean, a few tools
yeah.
potentially, because as you say, if somebody is mentally preparing for mind chatter, well, that might be part of the battle won. That might be enough. but it might not be. And so I'm guessing you're working with athletes to have in-game tools, techniques in order to turn down the volume of that mind chatter and carry on playing the game. Can you
Yeah,
talk to us about a few tools, or at least one tool that you might have written in
sure,
the book?
sure. Well, I think one that has gotten some of the best responses from the athletes that I work with is again, we're not being caught by surprise by chatter's presence on the scene, and so when it shows up, um, instead of the old way of avoiding thinking about it, trying to run from it, trying to distract ourselves from it, we're making room for the chatter. We're, as you said, changing our relationship to chatter, making room for it. And what that could mean is this idea of we're thanking it for sharing. We're appreciating, and I did this in my Ironman several years ago down in Mexico, where I was nervous as heck for any reason that anyone would be nervous. I had trained my butt off. I had high expectations. I didn't want to disappoint my coach. I wanted to have my whole family. It was expensive. And so my chatter starts going, wait a second. What if you freak out? You're the guy who helps everybody else not freak out. What if you have a freak out there? And then it started to worry about, well, what if you don't finish the swim in time? Then, my God, then your race day is over and you can't even do this thing that you've spent forever training for. And so there I am on the beaches of Mexico, kind of with a wry smile, an outward smile, but in my head saying, I'm thanking chatter for sharing. And to me, that means I want my athletes to be crystal clear, like I was there at the race, that I'm standing there on the beach in Mexico has to do with all these much bigger reasons than chatter. Like I'm trying to discover what I'm capable of. I'm trying to challenge myself and test myself and push myself to the limits. And I want my athletes to appreciate that they're there for all these deeply personal reasons and competitive reasons, and that when they're thanking their chatter for sharing, they're clear in their mind that chatter is agenda, has nothing to do with anything that has to do with why they're really there and what they're trying to accomplish. It is simply that protective, not so simply, but that protective mechanism that is worried about an hour from now what you're going to be thinking, feeling. It's worried about future you and the downfall of future you. It time travels into the future, worrying about every possible thing. So acknowledging it, thanking it, making room for it. Sometimes we even have some sort of behavioral ritual that they'll do, something with their hands, something with wiping their, pulling their socks up, wiping their hands on their socks. We come up with as many different ways as we can to get them to sort of smile to themselves in some way that I knew you were coming, chatter. I appreciate your input. We had one Olympic athlete who she would tell her chatter to wait over there and watch her do what she does. That was, very sassy, which we liked because she was sassy, and it kind of acknowledged, it sort of again made room for it, that it's got its. I'm going to let you do your thing. I'm going to now try to shift my attention to the things that I need to pay attention to. And frankly, Dan, that's a big part of the work. I'm sure it is for you too. Athletes sometimes don't know where they should be focused. It's kind of obvious you don't want to be spending a lot of time thinking about what could go wrong, but where should I? Should I be positive? We've talked about I'm not so keen on that necessarily. And in the book, I go through kind of where the mind, in my opinion, should land in order to try to execute, the skills and everything else that they're trying to accomplish.
Could you give us a clue as to where you believe the mind should land?
Yeah, I call them action goals.
Okay.
That's my term for something, for example, down at the beaches of Mexico, my mind shifting to swimming and the action connected to swimming, because needless to say, that was the thing that I was about to be doing, and kind of visualizing myself cruising sort of through the water. And if it was a soccer player or a baseball player, we would be focusing on what specific keys or actions or cues they can begin to attend um, to help them get into the right sort of frame of mind. Um, and sometimes this can seem plainly obvious, but for many athletes, it it goes by them so fast because they're so worrying and wondering what to do with the chatter, um, that they haven't spent a lot of energy focusing on these small goals, the kinds of things they might be working on all week in practice. Um, I do want to add a caveat, which is I have a lot of people, and you probably do too, think saying, this whole goal setting thing is a lot of BS and goal setting, and I obviously don't believe that, but I do think the mistake often made is people are skipping the mind chatter, managing the mind chatter step, and going right to goal setting. You're right. Goal setting isn't worth much if you don't know how to manage your chatter and put it in its proper place and proper perspective. Without that, I think it's very hard to stay focused on goals. Um, and of course, these are the types of goals that aren't results or outcome focused, but more in the moment, playing focused. And that I love about the work I do is with every athlete, you're coming up with their own very individualized, tailor made action goal plan. And that would be sort of step two to mind chatter, managing mind chatter. Step one, focusing on goals. Step two, I do have one more step, and we can get to that in a minute as well.
Well, and before we do, just to speak to the goal setting, I mean, I'm going to put my psychologist cap on here
Yeah,
and
please.
suggest that, yeah, I can get that pushback. As well, but I try to explain the difference between, and I might not use these terms with a client, but I might try to explain the difference between achievement goals and goal setting theory. Achievement goals being, as you spoke to, I'm being process oriented in this competition rather than, or task oriented rather
Right.
than performance and ego oriented. Whereas classic goal setting theory is, well, what do I want to achieve this season? What are my outcome goals, my performance goals? There's a distinction between
Yeah.
the two, which I think in the sports psychology literature,
Yeah.
we don't do a good enough job of helping coaches and competitors distinguish between.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah. Where do you want to improve? I said, if your coach was sitting here now, what would we be talking about in terms of your improvement goals? Or you said achievement goals or action goals. And I sometimes those conversations I'm trying to have with their coaches as well when the moment seems appropriate and right, or when the coaches are open to it, which is we're all looking to have the best season we can. That's sort of plainly obvious. We want to win as
Mm.
much games as we can. We want to succeed as much as we can. But what's the path there? What are the smaller goals? And really trying to get this new language, hopefully to work with the coaches to help get a common language. I know that's what you're doing. I'm sure that's what you're doing, at least with the teams that you're consulting with. And if we can kind of get everybody using this sort of new language of achievement goals or action goals, I've witnessed it firsthand. It's really exciting and helps in some ways keep chatter at bay. And and of course, um, the athletes feel like they can go into a match or a game kind of with that mental game plan, not just their physical game plan, but that mental game plan, um, that that kind of makes the mental game now a strength where it used to be a weakness. You know, I really want to sort of sell them on this idea that now, you know, you might just be able to beat that guy just simply because you're going to be able to hang in there more with the right kind of goals and the right kind of mind chatter management plan. That could be the difference between a win and a loss right there.
Quick question for you here about your process on the sports psych show. We've spoken to various people a bit about ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, Stephen Hayes's sort of third wave of cognitive therapy. Um, your process here feels a little bit like that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I acknowledge that I certainly borrow this some of these um, ideas of being willing,
Mm,
being open, um, about these sort of acceptance based
yes,
Eastern approaches.
yes,
I don't, as you know in the book, talk a lot about mindfulness per se, but it's a mindful based approach, just the
okay,
way we would want somebody to not judge thoughts as good or bad. Um, I want them to not judge chatter necessarily as bad. It's just a series of thoughts that show up under certain conditions quite predictably. And we want to, you know, what we resist, right? This is the Eastern piece of it. Just what we resist will persist, and
yeah.
what we let be will let us be. So that's idea of this non-resistance, allowing, and absolutely the act, the work in acceptance-based and commitment therapy has been an influence on me, and a lot of this follows suit from what Steve and those guys will talk about.
And in your experience, I mean, again, appreciating that you come from a clinical psychology background where you would have, in clinical practice, met with people who have quite pervasive challenges. Um, have you, in a sporting population, had much pushback in terms of, well, Mitch, I hear what you say, but I'm really feeling negative. I'm feeling this. This is at a feeling, an affective, an emotional level, more so at a cognitive level. Have you had much pushback there, or had challenges shifting feelings and emotions alongside this brand of mind chatter, or are you putting them all together?
I think if I understand your question right, there's times when this conversation, I we sort of hit a home run, and I don't. And this, I should add, this way of looking at how our mind works and is often very unique and new for the athlete. So it may take some time to fully digest it and
Mm.
incorporate it. It's sort of a weird concept. What do you mean by thanking it for sharing? That sort of sounds sort of weird. And some of the other approaches I suggest. So for some people, it just takes time. For some people, it's clear that they need more than just this particular approach. So I have had clients, sport clients and non-sport clients, but if we're just talking about sports, where we've had to sort of um, we've had to spend as much time in the psychological world, if you will, than in the sport world, and and there are aspects of these concepts that they might grab hold of and like, but there may be things about it that just don't seem to hit the right way. And so I don't want to give anyone the impression just because this is a book I wrote and it makes a difference that there aren't challenges in applying it, and that for some people they need more than this. For some my clients, this is great, but they need to be on medication, for example, in order to even be able to access what we're trying to access, because the level of of rumination, of obsession, of psychopathology has just made everything sort of difficult. So I can't even think, Mitch, about how to kind of thank anything for sharing or let it be, because my mind won't give me the space for it. So absolutely, Dan. And I think that's where I feel like being, I call it ambidextrous, helps, where we can shift gears. We could say, okay, you know what? I know we were trying to get ready for that event, and we can keep that in mind, but we need to spend some time, or we need to bring in another consultant or a psychiatrist. And there are plenty of times where what you're describing is the case. And the thing about that, I'll just say the last word on it, say, I just love, and what I'm so humbled by is is that many of these people feel like they haven't had a place where they could talk about it, who, for somebody who actually also gets the sports piece, like I'm not just going to stop playing even though my mind is full of so much consternation. I can appreciate, because I'm in the athlete world, just quitting isn't necessarily the answer, or certainly not an easy answer. And so those are absolutely are the kinds of kids and people that I might see, as well as the people who it's just a little bit more straightforward.
In chapter 7, the penultimate chapter, you invite people to play with courage. And the title of the book is Courage Over Confidence. And I know from having read through the book that confidence is a construct in sport that you question, and probably quite rightly so. We've questioned it numerous times on the Sports Psych Show. But playing with courage, courage over confidence. Can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Sure. So um, when you're full of chatter, when the mind is pumping out messages of doubt and second guessing and negative thinking, the reality is it's just hard to feel confident. It's because you've got a voice in your head barking at you every time you try to tell yourself that you've got this. You've got a voice that's saying, "What if you don't?" And so the the space I create for people, the freedom I'd like to think I help create for people, is to see that you don't need to play the confidence game anymore. It's just sort of cheap confidence to try to tell you something that maybe you don't really buy into. But there's hope, and I say, um, um, I explain that I think this is really more about an act of courage, getting out there with the chatter, doing what it's doing, and for you to stay focused on your action goals and etc. And because you can't be courageous by definition except in the presence of doubt and fear. In other words, fear always precedes courageous action. And we work from this place of this opportunity you have, nervous and everything else, to um, to practice courage when there's this other part of you telling you you should just go home. And I trademarked even the term courage over confidence, um, and it has been also one of these things with my work with athletes that has seems to really resonate with them. They stop fighting with themselves. They stop thinking that they have to be just right or perfectly so
Mm.
in order to play well. And as you know, Dan, just as well as I do, athletes tend to be, ritualistic, and I understand that. And they may have felt like $1 million Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in practice because every pass has been on point and they're loose. And they get to the match on the weekend and they go, "Oh my God, I don't feel this way." And they immediately think something's wrong because they're not feeling like they did earlier in the week. And that kind of fits this idea. Well, you don't need to. We need to get better at managing chatter, and think about what courage would look like in this space right now, and what courage might mean to Dan, what it might mean to Mitch, and what it might mean to Mary or Joe. Those are the conversations I'll have with each person. What would be courageous? What would be a sign of courage today? What would be an act of courage out there on Saturday? What would it look like? Can we envision it? Can we talk it through? Can we visualize it so that they can kind of begin to really plan for it, so to speak? And of course, I want them to know um, that they already have shown amazing signs of courage. How? Why? They might think, "What are you talking about? I'm a big wimp. I've been having all this chatter." Well, if all you were chatter, I might say to them, you would have quit a long time ago. There's something about you, Mr. or Miss Athlete, that keeps coming back for more. Has the terrible game on Sunday, but is at 8 a.m. practice on Monday. Has the terrible game on Sunday, but shows up for the lift on Tuesday. There's something about you that's persistent, that's driving you. I want them to connect with that part of them that is bigger than their chatter. That has more power than their chatter. Again, how do I know that? Because they're still working on it. They're still fighting the fight. And so they've already shown this courage. I want them to connect with that. And then I want to play out these opportunities for courage. And I say, in the book, confidence is a feeling. Courage is a choice, is a commitment. Making a commitment to courage excites these athletes, gets them thinking kind of in a new way, and it relieves them that they don't need to be confident, that that's not the name of the game, so to speak, and they could still perform well even without the confidence.
In summary, you're striving to help athletes build the capability to choose to take courageous action, even when their mind chatter tries to convince them that there's no hope.
Well said. Did I write that?
You did. I've just nicked it from your from the opening sentence of your final chapter, putting it together. But I thought that would be a neat way to conclude our
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you.
Mitch, really, really enjoyed that conversation, and I know you will have tapped the interest of the Sports Psych Show audience. I know everybody will be motivated now to go and get their copy of Courage Over Confidence. So, with that in mind, how can people get a copy of that book, and how can people find you and follow you?
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Also, thank you for this engaging hour. I enjoyed talking with you and hope we'll find times to collaborate or chat in the future. I would say the easiest way to get the book is through Amazon. Um, and just look up my name. It's Greene with an E at the end of Greene, and the book's title is starts with Courage Over Confidence, and that'll get you there. My website is also another way you could find out about what I'm doing and also get access to the book. I just finished recording the audiobook just about 2 days ago, so that should be out also in a few months for those of you. And there's more out there than I realized after people are telling me who don't really necessarily want to read but want to listen. Um, that will be available also on Amazon. My website is greenpsych.com, and I'm pretty active on social on Instagram. And my at is at greenpsych, GREENE PSYCH. And please reach out. Also, if there are questions from any of this, and again, thank you, Dan, for the time.
Thanks so much, Mitch. Brilliant. Wow, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.